So far, we have understood India's neighborhood, major power partnerships, geoeconomics, West Asia, and the Indo Pacific. Now, let us move to the one final pillar of the international relations syllabus, that is global governance. Global governance and institutions. Before discussing the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, or the World Bank, let us begin with one basic question. Why do countries need international institutions? The answer is simple. Many contemporary challenges cannot be solved by one country alone, like climate change, pandemics, international trade, financial stability, cyber security, maritime governance, terrorism, outer space, and artificial intelligence. These issues cross national boundaries. They require collective action. This is the idea behind global governance. So, global governance does not mean a word government. It means countries cooperate through rules, institutions, agreements, and a dialogue to address common global challenge. Now, another important question arises after this discussion. If international institutions already exist, why does India repeatedly demand reforms? The answer lies in history. If international institutions already exist, why does India repeatedly demand reforms? The answer lies in history. Most major international institutions were created after the Second World War. At that time, many present day developing countries had limited influence in global decision making. Today, the international distribution of power has changed considerably. Emerging economies contribute significantly to global growth, like trade, technology, and development. Yet, many international institutions continue to reflect an older balance of power. Many international institutions continue to reflect an older balance of power. This gap between changing global realities and existing institutional structures is the central reason behind India's reform agenda. So let us understand India's vision. India consistently supports reformed multilateralism. India is not arguing against multilateral institutions, nor is India seeking to replace them. India seeks to make them more representative, more democratic, more transparent, more effective, and more responsive to contemporary global realities. This principle applies across almost every major international institutions. So let us first discuss the United Nations. The United Nations remain the cornerstone of the international system. It plays an important role in maintaining international peace, promoting sustainable development, protecting human rights, and coordinating humanitarian action. However, India argues that the UN, particularly the Security Council, must better reflect present day geopolitical realities. A more representative Security Council would strengthen both its legitimacy and its effectiveness. So, India therefore supports comprehensive reforms that improve representation, especially for developing countries. So, that is why India need for pressing reforms for United Nations Security Council. Now, let us move to World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization provides the rules governing international trade. So India strongly supports a rules-based multilateral trading system. However, the WTO also faces important structural challenges. What are those challenges? The dispute settlement mechanism has weakened, making trade rules more difficult to enforce. At the same time, developing countries continue to emphasize issues such as food security, agricultural support, and developmental flexibility, etc. India consistently argues that international trade should remain free, fair, inclusive, and development oriented. Economic development and food security, particularly for developing countries, must remain important considerations in global trade negotiations. Economic development and food security, particularly for developing countries, must remain important considerations in global trade negotiations. Next, let us understand the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank. These institutions continue to play an important role in financial stability, development finance, and economic cooperation. However, India, along with many developing countries, supports reforms that provide greater representation and fairer voting arrangements for emerging economies. The objective is not institutional confrontation. The objective is institutional legitimacy. Institutions remain effective only when they reflect contemporary realities. Now, another important question naturally arises: if institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank already exist, why have countries established institutions such as the New Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank? The answer is straightforward. Developing countries require enormous investments in infrastructure, renewable energy, urban development, digital connectivity, transport, and climate resilience. So, additional development finance therefore strengthens the international finance architecture. So, these institutions should generally be understood as complementing the existing system rather than replacing it. Now, let us connect another important theme here is the global south. The expression global south refers broadly to developing countries that continue to face common developmental challenge. What are those challenges? These include poverty, food security, climate finance, technology access, digital inclusion, and sustainable development. India increasingly seeks to build partnership across the global south. India increasingly seeks to build partnerships across the global south through capacity building, developmental cooperation, technology sharing, digital public infrastructure, renewable energy, and human resource development. So, India's engagement is based on partnership, not dependency, capacity building, no, not conditionality. So, this approach has strengthened India's credibility among many developing countries. So, another important transformation has taken place here. India is no longer participating only as a member of international institutions. It is increasingly contributing ideas, initiatives, and institutional innovations. So, the International Solar Alliances promotes global cooperation in renewable energy. The Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure encourages resilient infrastructure development. India's experience with digital public infrastructure has also attracted international interest as an inclusive model for digital governance. Notice the larger trend here. India is gradually evolving from a participant in global governance to an active contributor to global governance. So let us step back now. Notice how all these institutions appear different. The UN, WTO, IMF, World Bank, NDB, AIB, AI, AIIB, ISA, CDRI. At first, they seem unrelated. In reality, they all reflect one common question. What is that common question? That is, how should countries cooperate to solve global problems? How should how should countries cooperate to solve global problems? India's answer is remarkably consistent. International institutions should be inclusive, representative, development oriented, rule based, and responsive to the needs of both developed and developing countries. That is the essence. That is the essence of reformed multilateralism. So here, how should countries cooperate to solve global problems? So India's answer is remarkably consistent. That is, international institutions should be inclusive, should be representative, should be development oriented, should be rule based, and should be responsive to the needs of both developed and developing countries. This is the essence of reformed multilateralism. What is the current affairs anchor here 2025 and 2026? The United Nations first India's demand is specific text based negotiations in the intergovernmental negotiations process, which has drifted for decades without a single negotiating text. India works through the G4 with Brazil, Germany, Japan, and the L69 group of developing countries and supports greater African representation. Remember also the India completed its eighth term as a non-permanent Security Council member in 2021-2022, and that the UN's own UN80 reform initiative was launched in 2025. Proof that reform pressure now comes from the inside the system too. So comes to the WTO, your strongest single fact, that is the appellate body has been paralyzed since December 2019, leaving trade rules effectively unenforceable. Comes to the India's agenda regarding WTO, restore binding dispute settlement, restore two-tier binding dispute settlement, protect public stockholding for food security, and keep development at the center of trade rules. Comes to the financial institutions, India's IMF quota is about 2.75%, far below its economic weight, and the latest quota review ended without realignment. That single number is your evidence for why representation reform matters. Set against it the new institutions, the new development bank in Shanghai, whose first president was an Indian, and the AIIB, where India is the second largest shareholder and the largest borrower. And now the centerpiece of 2026, India holds the BRICS chairship for 2026, its fourth, under the theme of building for resilience, innovation, cooperation, and sustainability. with the summit in New Delhi in September 2026, as BRICS completes 20 years and digests its expansion into grouping of 10 plus members. Pair this with India's G20 presidency of 2023, whose defining achievement was making the African Union as a permanent G20 member. And with the three voices of the Global South summits, India has convened since 2023. India is not only demanding reform of global governance through the G20, BRICS, ISA, CDRI, and digital public infrastructure. India is already supplying global governance. How UPSC may ask this? UPSC is unlikely to ask write a note on the WTO. Instead, it may ask like this: discuss India's vision for reforming global governance institutions, or why has the demand for reformed multilateralism gained importance in the 21st century, or evaluate India's role in strengthening the voice of global south within international institutions, or discuss the need to reform international financial institutions in the context of changing global economic realities. Notice that pattern. UPSC tests a conceptual understanding, not institutional descriptions. Conceptual understanding comes to the answer writing framework. Whenever a question appears on global governance, remember four headings. First, why are reforms necessary? Second, major institutions. Third, India's vision. Fourth, way forward. First one, why are reforms necessary? Changing the balance of power, rise of emerging economies, new global challenges, and institutional legitimacy. That is why reforms are necessary. Comes to the second heading, that is major institutions. United Nations, WTO, IMF, World Bank, NDB, AIIB. And third one, that is India's vision. What is the India's vision? Reformed multilateralism, greater representation, rules based international order, development oriented cooperation, and global south partnerships. These are the Indian vision. India's vision. And comes to the fourth heading, that is way forward. What is the way forward? Reform international institutions, strengthen multilateral cooperation, improve representation of developing countries, promote sustainable development, enhance technology and development partnerships, and build consensus through dialogue. So comes to the quick recap. That is, India's objective is not to replace the existing international order, but to reform it so that global governance becomes more representative, inclusive, effective, and responsive to 21st century realities while strengthening the voice of the global south. This single sentence, this single sentence can conclude almost every GS2 answer on global governance. So comes to the PYQ corner. What is the PYQ corner here? The reform processes in the United Nations remains unresolved because of the delicate imbalance of East and West and entanglement of the USA versus Russo-Chinese alliance. Examine and critically evaluate the East-West policy confrontations in the regard. This is 2025 question, 15 marker question. Asked in 2025. Too little cash, too much politics leaves UNESCO fighting for life. Discuss the statement in the light of US withdrawal and its accusation of the cultural body as being anti-Israel bias. This question asked in 2019, 15 marks. WTO is an important international institution where decisions taken affect countries in a profound manner. What is the mandate of WTO and how binding are its decisions? Critically analyze India's stand and the latest round of talks on food security 2014 12.5 marker question. Virus is conflict is affecting the functioning of the SCO. In the light of the above statement, point out the role of India in mitigating the problems. This question asked in 2023 10 marker question. So, and there is one partnership that captures this entire global south story better than any other. That is a partnership UPSC placed in 2025 paper itself, India and Africa. Let us give it the focused attention it now demands. That is India, Africa, and the global south, from solidarity to strategic partnership, 5 pillars. So in the 2025 mains paper, UPSC asked a full question on the India Africa digital partnership. That was not an accident, it was a signal. So let us build this chapter around one central idea, that is India's engagement with Africa has evolved from historical solidarity to strategic partnership. The solidarity phase is well known, that is anti-colonialism, non-alignment, south to south cooperation, shared struggles, shared identities. The strategic partnership phase is what UPSC now tests. It rests on 5 pillars. What are the 5 pillars? First, development partnership on African terms. India's model is built on capacity building, concessional lines of credit, and training through ITEC, scholarships, and hundreds of completed development projects across the continent. The guiding principles articulated in the Kampala Principles of 2018 is that India's engagement is guided by African priorities, partnerships, not conditionality. That contrast with debit heavy models of engagement is a scoring point in every answer. That is first one, development of African terms. Then comes to the second one, digital partnership. This is the 2025 PYQ theme. India offers Africa its digital public infrastructure, identity, payments, and data exchange systems as a global public good, along with tele-education and telemedicine networks that grew out of the Pan Africa e network. Co-development, non-technology dependence. This is DPI as global public good. Then comes to the third one, that is institutional voice. The defending achievement of India's G20 presidency in 2023 was securing permanent G20 membership for the African Union. Add to this Voice of the Global South summits, which India began convening in 2023, and India's consistent support for greater African representation in the UN Security Council. India does not merely speak about the global South, it creates platforms for the global South. And fourth one is economic and resource. Economic and resource partnership. India Africa trade is around $100 billion mark, making India one of Africa's largest trading partners. The new frontier is critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, where African partnerships feed directly into India's energy transition and geo-economic strategy. And comes to the maritime and security, that is the fifth pillar, maritime and security cooperation. The Western Indian Ocean connects Africa. The Western Indian Ocean connects Africa to India's Mahasagar vision. Mahasagar Vision. India conducts with joint exercises with African navies, including the AIKME maritime exercise launched in 2020, alongside anti-piracy operations, defense training, and capacity building. This is regarding maritime and security cooperation. So peacekeeping legacy also. Notice how this chapter connects everything you studied: global south, geoeconomics, maritime security, digital public infrastructure, and reformed multilateralism in one relationship. So comes to the current affairs anchor, that is 2026. Now the anchors that make this chapter a 2026 chapter, that is the headline development of the headline development is the fourth India Africa Forum Summit, IAFS fourth. The last forum summit was held in New Delhi in October 2015. 11 years later, IAFS 4 was convened for New Delhi, scheduled for the end of May 2026, with leaders from more than 40 African nations expected, under the theme of an India-Africa strategic partnership for innovation, resilience, and inclusive transformation. Then something instructive happened in May 2026. India and the African Union jointly postponed the summit because of a public health emergency and Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And here is the analytical point. India did not treat the postponement as a setback. It pledged support to the Africa CDC led response. So, explicitly backing an African led approach to the African crisis. That single episode captures India's entire African doctrine. Partnerships on Partnership on African terms. You have to use it. Comes to the numbers part. India Africa trade crossed 100 billion, 190 $103 billion in 2024-2025, growing 17% in a single year, making India Africa's largest trading partner. Cumulative Indian investment in Africa is estimated at around $80 billion. India has extended more than 190 plus 90 plus lines of credit worth over $10 billion across 41 African nations. And since 2018, India has opened 17 new diplomatic missions, taking its presence to 46 African countries. Two more anchors, that is, first, leadership diplomacy. The Prime Minister traveled to Africa 3 times in 2025 alone, including Ghana and Namibia, with Ghana conferring its national honor and Namibia adopting India's UPI, a live example of digital public infrastructure as a global public good. And second, the resource frontier. Africa holds roughly 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves like cobalt, lithium, copper, rare earths, and a striking asymmetry. Africa has around 69% of the world's best solar resources, yet solar power contributes only about 3% of its electricity. For India, that is not a statistic, it is an agenda. Critical mineral partnerships, international solar alliance projects, and local currency trade, aligning India's Vikasit Bharat 2047 with Africa's Agenda 2063. Then comes to the answer writing framework. Whenever a question appears on India, Africa or Global South, remember four headings. First one, evolution. Second one, pillars. Third one, challenges. And the fourth one, way forward. Comes to the evolution part, that is the first one, solidarity phase. What is solidarity phase? That is anti-colonialism, non-alignment movement, south to south cooperation. Then strategic partnership phase, that is five pillars. Then second one is five pillars, that is pillars of partnership, development on African terms, Kampala principles, ITEC lines of credit, then digital partnership, DPA, UPA, tele-education, telemedicine, then institutional voice, AU in G20, voice of Global South, UNSC reform, then economic and resource partnership, that is trade, critical minerals and energy, maritime and security cooperation, Mahasagar, AI key, ME peacekeeping, etc. Then comes to the third one, that is challenges. This is most important. Trade below potential. Trade below potential. Concentration in a few countries. Competition from deeper pocketed partners. Project delivery and credit execution gaps. Extraction versus value addition concerns in minerals. So these are the challenges. What are the challenges? Trade below potential. Potential is higher, but trade is normal. Then comes to the deeper pocketed competitors, then delivery gaps, then extraction versus value additional concern. These are challenges. Then comes to the way forward. What is the way forward? Institutionalized symmetry, convince IAFS for at the earliest, then move from lines of credit to co-production and value addition in Africa, then scale DPI, digital public infrastructure exports and skilling partnerships, build long-term critical mineral offtake frameworks, deepen AF, CFTA, African CFTA linkages, and local currency trade. How UPSC may ask this? It already has India-Africa digital partnership, is achieving mutual respect, co-development, and long-term institutional partnerships. Elaborate. This question asked in 2025. That was 2025. The 2026 version may ask about critical minerals, maritime cooperation, or India's global South leadership. Your framework remains the same: solidarity to strategy across five pillars. So comes to the mains ammunition verified anchors. I already discussed, like African Union admitted as permanent G20 member, New Delhi Summit 2023 through India's initiative, Three Voice of Global South, summits convened by India 2023-2024, India Africa trade, more or less USD 100 billion, India among Africa's largest trading partners, concession lines of credit, more or less USD 12 billion dollars, then 200 plus projects, duty due to duty free tariff preferences scheme 2008 for African LDCs, then Kampala Principles 2018 engagement guided by African priorities, ITEC training and scholarships, 17 new Indian missions in Africa announced in 2018. Then digital comes to the digital part, DPI, India Stock Cooperation, MOUs, E-Vidya Bharati, E-Arogya Bharati, successors to the Pan Africa E-Network, basis of the 2025 PYQ. Then comes to the security part, AI key ME, Africa India key maritime engagement exercise 2025, anti-piracy patrols, defense training, Western Indian Ocean region under Mahasagar. Then comes to the critical minerals part, partnerships and exploration interest in Africa, lithium, cobalt linked to National Critical Mineral Mission. Then comes to the IAFS 4 convened for New Delhi after an 11-year gap. IAFS 3 New Delhi October 2015 jointly postponed May 2026 owing to the Ebola outbreak in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. India pledged support to the Africa CDC led response. Then comes to the trade part. USD 103 billion 2024-2025 plus 17% of year India India is Africa's third largest trading partner. Cumulative Indian investment more or less USD 80 billion, 190 plus lines of credit worth USD 10 billion plus across 41 countries. Comes to the diplomatic footprint, 17 new missions since 2018, presence in 46 countries, and 50 outgoing and 100 incoming high level visits in a decade. PM visited Africa 3 times in 2025, including Ghana and Namibia. Comes to the digital part, Namibia adopted UPI, first live African deployment of India's payments stack, builds on the 2025 PYQ theme, resources and energy. Africa is more or less 30% of global critical mineral reserves, 60% of the world's best solar resources, but only 3% of its electricity from solar. The IACA and critical minerals case in one line. These are regarding India-Africa relationship and global South question. Then comes to the frameworks. Africa CFTA operational 2021, market of 1.313 billion, Vikasit Bharat 2047, AU Agenda 2063 alignment, local currency trade under discussion including with South Africa. Then comes to the PYQ corner, that is India Africa digital partnership is achieving mutual respect, co-development and long-term institutional partnerships. Elaborate 2025 10 marker question. If the last few decades were of Asia's growth story, the next few are expected to be Africa's. In the light of this statement, examine India's influence in Africa in recent years. This question asked in 2021 10 marker question comes to the quick recap. India's Africa policy has matured from post-colonial solidarity into a strategic partnership built on capacity building, digital co-development, institutional voice, economic and mineral cooperation, and maritime security, making Africa central to India's global South leadership. So we have now completed every major theme of the GS-II international relations syllabus. Before we conclude, there is a one final task, that is, let us connect the entire syllabus into one integrated framework, the framework of that UPSC expects every serious aspirant to internalize before entering the examination hall. That is chapter number 13, the UPSC International Relations Framework, connecting the entire GS-II IR syllabus. That is every question is really about India's response. This is UPSC Secret, the master framework of chapter number 13. We have now completed the entire international relations syllabus for GS-II. Before we conclude, let us spend a few minutes connecting everything we have learned. What is we have learned so far? Because one of the biggest mistakes aspirants make is studying international relations as separate topics like India China, India Bangladesh, Quad, West Asia, United Nations, BRICS, WTO, diaspora. These appears to be different chapters, but UPSC does not think like this. But how UPSC think like? UPSC expects you to understand one integrated foreign policy framework. Today, let us build that framework together. What is that framework? Step 1, that is, everything begins with national interest. Everything begins with national interest. Every country, regardless of its size or level of development, conducts foreign policy to protect its sovereignty, security, economic prosperity, technological capability, and long-term development. Therefore, whenever you read any international development, ask only one question: how does this affect India's national interest? That question immediately gives the direction to your answer. Then comes to the step 2. How does how does India protect those interests? Through strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy means what? India retains the freedom to take independent decisions based on its own national interest. It does not permanently align with any military bloc, nor does it isolate itself from international relations. Instead of that, India builds multiple partnerships while preserving independent decision making. That is why India simultaneously cooperates with the United States, Russia, France, Japan, the European Union, the Gulf countries, Africa, ASEAN, and many other partners. That is not contradiction. It is strategic flexibility. Comes to the third point, that is step 3. Where does India's foreign policy begin? It begins its neighborhood because geography cannot be changed. A peaceful neighborhood strengthens security, trade, connectivity, energy cooperation, and regional stability. What? A peaceful neighborhood strengthens what? Security, trade, connectivity, energy cooperation, and regional stability. Therefore, neighborhood first remains the foundation of India's foreign policy. Therefore, neighborhood first remains the foundation of the Indian foreign policy. Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Maldives, Pakistan, and China will always occupy a central place in India's strategic thinking. Then comes to the step 4, that is how does India strengthen its influence? Through connectivity, roads, railways, ports, power grids, digital infrastructure, trade corridors, maritime cooperation. Notice, please notice the transformation. Infrastructure is no longer only about development. It has become an instrument of diplomacy, economic integration, and strategic influence. This explains the growing importance of BBIN, IMEC, Chabahar, and regional connectivity initiatives. So, step 5, that is how is power changing? Earlier, power was measured primarily through military capability. But today, the thing has changed. Today, power increasingly depends upon technology, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, critical minerals, digital infrastructure, innovation, and resilient supply chains. This is the rise of geoeconomics. Economic capability has become strategic capability. This is the rise of geoeconomics. Economic capability has become strategic capability. So, therefore, India's foreign policy increasingly supports technology partnerships, manufacturing, innovation, and economic resilience. And how does India respond to changing regional geopolitics? This is step 6. Through issue-based partnerships, the Indo-Pacific, the Quad, Sagar, Maritime Domain Awareness, and Colombo Security Council all represent practical cooperation to strengthen maritime security, regional stability, connectivity, and resilience. This reflects another important transformation. What is that? Countries increasingly cooperate through functional minilateralism. What is functional unilateralism? We discussed so far, that is small, flexible, purpose driven partnerships that deliver practical outcomes. Comes to the step 7, that is how does India engage with wider world? India supports a stable multipolar rules based international order. Stable, what is the stable? Because development requires peace. Multipolar, because no single power should dominate global affairs. And rules based, because international law provides predictability and legitimacy. This explains the India's consistent support for UN clause, peaceful dispute settlement dialogue, and multilateral cooperation. Comes to the step 8, how does India view global governance? India believes that international institutions remain essential. However, they must evolve the United Nations. However, they must evolve the United Nations, the WTO, the IMF, and the World Bank must become more representative, more inclusive, more effective, and more responsive to contemporary realities. This is the idea of reformed multilateralism. India's objective is not to weaken multilateral institutions, but to strengthen their legitimacy. Come to the step number 9, that is what kind of global role does India seek? Till now, we have noticed the evolution. Earlier, India primarily participated in international institutions. Today, India increasingly contributes solutions like the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, Digital Public Infrastructure, Development Partnerships, Capacity Building, Global South Cooperation. India is gradually evolving from a participant to a contributor and increasingly an arm shaper within the international system. Then comes to step 10. Now ask yourself one final question. What is the ultimate objective behind neighborhood first, Act East, major power partnerships, geoeconomics, West Asia, the Indo-Pacific, the reformed multilateralism? The answer is remarkably simple: to create an external environment that supports India's internal transformation. Foreign policy is not an end itself. It means to achieve economic development, it means to achieve national security, it is a means to achieve technological progress, it is a means to achieve employment, it is a means to achieve energy security, and the goal of that is Vikasit Bharat. That is the larger purpose behind every foreign policy initiative. The UPSC secret here. Now let me share one final insight. Many aspirants think UPSC asks questions about China, the Quad, the WTO, the BRICS, etc. Actually, it does not. UPSC asks about questions about India's response, India's choices, India's strategy, India's national interest. Therefore, never write an answer as if you are describing world politics. Write every answer from India's perspective. That is the single biggest difference between an average answer and a high scoring answer. The master answer framework here: whenever you see any international relations question, remember these six steps. What are the six steps? First and foremost, why is this issue important for India's national interest? First, why does is a matter for India's national interest? The master answers framework here is: When you see any international relations question, remember these 6 steps. Why is this issue important for India's national interest? Then second one, what opportunities does it create? And third one, what challenges does it create? And fourth one, how has India responded? And fifth one, which principles guided India's response, like strategic autonomy, neighborhood first, act east, geoeconomics, global south, etc. Comes to the principles part. Act east, Sagar, reformed multilateralism, rules based international order, etc. Finally, what should be the way forward? Dialogue, diversified partnerships, economic resilience, technology cooperation, institutional reforms, sustainable development, consensus based diplomacy. These six, these 6 steps you have to be used in your answer writing whenever comes to international relation question. Comes to the final recap. If you remember only this flow chart, you can reconstruct almost entire GS-II international relation syllabus in the examination hall. I'm going to tell you, explain you the what is the flow chart here is. That is first and foremost, first national interest, then strategic autonomy, then neighborhood first, then connectivity, then geoeconomics, then major power partnerships, then West Asia, then Indo-Pacific, then global governance, then reformed multilateralism, and India as a norm shaper, and finally Vikasit Bharat. And if you want one phrase that captures everything this marathon has described, use this. That is, India is moving from being a rule taker to a rule shaper. India is moving from being a rule taker to rule shaper. In trade, in technology, in AI governance, in the institutions of global south, India no longer merely adapts to the international system, it increasingly helps to write its rules. One phrase, any conclusion, use it. India is moving from being a rule taker to a rule shaper. In trade, in technology, in AI governance, in the institutions of global south, India no longer merely adapts to the international system. It increasing helps to write its rules. One phrase, any conclusion, use it. Then comes to the final message. International relations is not about remembering hundreds of current affairs. So this is going to be value addition for mains 2026 keyword bank. Use this naturally, like strategic autonomy, national interest, multipolarity, reformed multilateralism, global south, geoeconomics, trusted technology, supply chain resilience, critical minerals, digital public infrastructure, AI governance, functional minilateralism, connectivity diplomacy, maritime domain awareness, blue economy, strategic patience, then assured retaliation. This is also called new normal in Pakistan relations. Then economic security, development partnership, and a rule shaper. This keyword bank is going to be used in your 2026 mains answers. And comes to the converts events into concepts. Never report the event, write the concept it proves. Like comes to Operation Sindur, May 2025. In this counter terror doctrine, assured retaliation, the new normal. Then IWT abeyance. In this securitization of water, every instrument of statecraft comes to the India EU FTA Jan 2026. In this, the part doctrine is geoeconomics trade as strategy. Then India US trade deal 5 2026. This is managing interdependence with strategic autonomy. Then comes to Hormuz closure. Every energy security. Energy security is diversification of sources, routes, fuels. Diversification of sources, diversification of routes, diversification of fuels. And Depsang Demchok disengagement 2024 October. This is tactical tha. Tactical tha is not strategic, not equal to strategic reset. Then comes to BRICS chairship. This is Global South leadership, reformed multilateralism, AI Impact Summit Feb 2026. That is AI governance inclusion, not just competition. IAFS 4 postponed May 2026. This is partnership on African terms. Then India Canada reset 25-26. This is politics of developed countries and India's interests. Then comes to Namibia adapt UPI digital public infrastructure as development diplomacy. Then Quad I2 U2 IMEC. This is functional minilateralism. Then comes to the conclusion bank. We are going to use this is one sentence per chapter in any answer regarding the particular chapter. Comes to the foundations, you have to use this national interest to pursue through strategic autonomy, multiple partnerships, independent decisions, a multipolar rules based order. As far as foundations chapter is concerned, comes to the India's neighborhood chapter. In this, stability through connectivity, integration, security cooperation and shared development, judged by delivery. This is going to be used in your conclusion. As far as neighborhood comes to the Bangladesh part, India Bangladesh, connectivity, economic integration, security cooperation, strategic patience and mutual trust. This is going to be used in your Bangladesh. Comes to the Pakistan, assured retaliation, no nuclear blackmail, no terrorist sponsored distinction, every instrument of statecraft until terror ends credibly and irreversibly. Then come to China, neither confrontation nor dependence, stable competition on border peace, autonomy, resilience, and engagement. Comes to the major powers, no permanent alignment, diversified issue based cooperation guided by strategic autonomy. Comes to geoeconomics chapter, that is influence now flows from technology, supply chain, critical resources, and competitiveness. Then comes to West Asia conclusion part, from energy centric ties to comprehensive partnership, connectivity, geoeconomics, technology, and maritime security. Comes to Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific, autonomy plus maritime security, minilateralism, international law, that equal to a free, open, fair, inclusive, rules-based order. Then comes to global governance, reform the order, don't replace it. Representative, inclusive effect response. Then comes to Africa and global south, solidarity matured into strategic partnership. Solidarity matured into strategic partnership. That is capacity, digital co-development, voice, minerals, maritime security. Then comes to the marathon. This is the India is moving from rule taker to rule shaper. So comes to the final part, final message of international relations of Marathon GS-II for 2026 mains. International relations is not about remembering hundreds of current affairs. It is not about memorizing every summit, every declaration, or every bilateral visit. It is about understanding how India protects its national interests, build partnerships, manage competition, creates opportunity, and contributes to stable, prosperous, and rules-based international order. Events will change, governments will change, global politics will evolve, but the principles of foreign policy remain remarkably consistent. If you understand those principles, you will be able to analyze even a completely new issue in the examination hall. That is exactly what UPSC expects from you. That is, this is all about international relations. You have to understand the framework that events will organize themselves. IR is not about memorizing hundreds of current affairs. It is about understanding how India engages a rapidly changing world. That is exactly what UPSC expects. All the very best for UPSC GS-II Mains 2026.